to another early edition of the Colonel's Corner and War Hamster Brady. How are you this morning, Brady?
I'm a little tired. I did a late nighter last night with Gordon, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. He had me jump on his Book of Trump series on Badlands Media, and we followed up on his Robert Maxwell stuff. And if your ears were ringing or burning, whatever the expression is, it's because we played about 5 minutes of the Robert Maxwell video you and I did more than a year ago.
Well, I'm honored.
Yeah, no, it was really good. And of course, the chat was all, "Hey, Colonel." So, Badlands Media their audience still knows and loves you.
Yep. Yeah, they put out some very, very good information.
Yeah, Gordon, I've known probably as long as anybody in the influencer corner. And, his very first appearance was on my very tiny channel, like 3 or 4 years ago. He was one of the first guests. I wanted him to tell his story. And I introduced him to a few people. And next thing you know, he's on Badlands Media. So he's a good friend, and I'm very proud of the great research he does. So,
well, you find out that it's a very small community from that perspective, because obviously my relationship with you ended up with Ron Partain and the Alpha Warrior series and my guest appearances on Badlands. So it is definitely a small, tight-knit community.
I think if you're putting out if you're doing quality research and putting out quality content, you're just it's like magnets. People, we find each other.
But that kind of transitions into what we're going to talk about. So it's interesting to me that the quality of your research doesn't translate into audience, though, does it?
Not necessarily at all.
Yeah.
I mean, well, yeah, but and that's really one of the interesting things. You and I are in this game because we really want to make a difference and educate people so that they can help make a difference. And we've got other people that are doing this to make a living. And you get some conflicts there. Where does somebody come from? And of course, there's all kinds of plants and shills that have inserted themselves in this movement. So discernment's so important. And
and that's not to say they don't put out good information, but they almost function as a gatekeeper.
Yeah, to some degree. And I think that, I don't know if we're going to call today's show about gatekeepers or it's something along those lines. Limited Hangout, I think, is the name of this one.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, did we queue up our topic well enough now? So we jump into it?
We did jump in.
Okay. Well, the idea for this show at our very odd hour came from, I was on the couch watching YouTube videos, and Mike Benz is on. And I'm just scrolling through, and I see the title of this video he does. And if we want to pull that up.
Okay.
The title of this video, and it's from about 2 weeks ago, says How the CIA Created the Modern Universities. Now, Mike Benz puts out a lot of great information. He's one of the better researchers I've seen. And, I can watch his 3-hour streams and get something out of it every single time. He talks about the same type of topics we do from a slightly different angle. And I think he's just an outstanding researcher. What the Colonel has, been outspoken about, and I've kind of said the same thing, is it's not what he says that's wrong at all, and it's great. It's what he leaves out. It's what he doesn't say. And maybe we can nudge him into doing that and using this great research. I don't know. I'm not calling the guy out by any stretch. Colonel's probably a little bit more bold doing that than I am. But this title...
Well, it's the reason why he blocked me, because I did.
Yeah. And that's not the way we do things. I mean, you shouldn't be blocking people because they disagree with you. You should engage people who disagree with you if they do it in good faith. I love being wrong. It means I learned something new.
Correct.
So somebody, and people do that in the comments in my chat all the time. They tell me, "Oops, you got this one wrong." And great, thank you. Let me know if I get something wrong. I'm certainly not the all-knowing, powerful Oz, and neither is Benz, and neither are you.
Correct.
But How the CIA Created the Modern Universities is a very problematic title for a video, because as we've been doing in our Secret Society series and your Gladio stuff, all this stuff, we've made it really clear that the modern universities were a problem long before the CIA was even an idea. And that's the issue I have. And because you look at who started the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, they were all, Wild Bill Donovan came from Columbia University. Most of the early CIA guys came from academia. Woodrow Wilson, who got us into World War I, came from academia.
Correct.
And where does academia come from? Well, they get founded by the foundations that are funded by the, both old money and new money American dynasties, a lot of which made their fortunes sucking off the government teat. And that's the big circle. And Benz almost gets it, but he never names those names at the top. He talks about the foundation.
He will never do that. And that is my biggest complaint. He hides it behind this nebulous blob. And if you don't go to the seat of the problem, you will never fix the problem. So all of the air in the room gets sucked out with these incorrect hypotheses, and all of and that's the problem, because you have to look behind the curtain. It's like being in a theater and only looking at what's on stage. You can get audience after audience after audience. That's the whole purpose of Hollywood. Look at what's on stage. Never look at what's behind the curtain. That to me is not research. I can walk into a auditorium, watch a movie, and do a review. What's that review mean if you're not looking behind the curtain?
Yeah, and we've shown. Go ahead.
I would go one step further. If, as you just eloquently pointed out, which we're going to do a little bit more in detail after this video, if you understand who actually created the modern university, and those same people created the CIA, where are you going to place the CIA and protect it and use it as a recruiting tool? You're going to place it on the campuses of the colleges you created and you control.
Yeah, and not just control, but you think about who sets the social narrative. It all comes from the institutions, mostly the universities.
Yes.
And look, these university professors, I went to college, you went to college, there's some good professors, and some of them, mean perfectly well, and they're legitimate studies and all that. I'm not saying they have no value whatsoever, but most of these people have never worked in the real world. And, what they learn is they learn their social engineering, and which all, comes from the Tavistock Institute, which ties us back into the Fabian socialists that came over from England and gave us the Anglo-American rules-based order, or the liberal world order, which they're trying so hard to put American lives on the line all around the world to preserve, to protect my democracy. and that's the disease we're fighting. But where does it come from? Well, it comes from, these people that live in these, Gilded Age mansions, the smoky halls of, smoky rooms, the halls of power and the corridors. And it's the same small circle of people over and over again. It's these bloodlines, these families, and we've been talking about it nonstop.
Correct.
So to suggest that all this stuff started in 1947 when the CIA came around, it's a bad title and a good video, but a
limited video that supports the title.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. If the title, you're only going to limit your material to support the title. So I'm going to push back a little bit in that the video supports the title, but it is not the whole story.
Yeah, that's well said. It's fair enough. And well, let's jump into it. And we'll just stop and pause and ad lib and give comments.
Okay.
It gets really good. I'm gonna skip around a little bit, but we'll just set it here. Should have. Let me know. Make sure we have volume. I'm going to hit play and just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if I got volume.
Okay. We don't have volume.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop the share and do it right.
I've done that so many times.
You know what I need to do? All right. I'm going to have some dead air for 10 seconds, so you may go ahead and entertain our guests while I move the video over to another browser.
Okay, so what I want everybody to preface this with is we're going to marry the Skull and Bones series that primarily Warhamster, but Warhamster and I have put out over the last several months. And we are going to show you how not only was Tavistock involved, but Germany and the infamous Hegelian dialect, which in most of the time frame where these universities were kind of being created, like in the case of Johns Hopkins, but also expanding exponentially, there's an entire cadre of Skull and Bones people that go to Germany and are mentored by the very people that set up the Hegelian dialect, which of course we know feeds in directly to the Fabian Society, their one world order, in creating the divisions and pitting each other against each other. So that's kind of the premise.
I can work with that very easily. That framework is that we can fit that. All right, I got it all loaded up. If you want to put us up on screen.
All righty.
And
the CIA in
volume's now on, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, here we go. Starting from the beginning.
The CIA in 1951 is telling the Ford Foundation, hey, put a shit ton of money into big universities and their area studies programs. The establishment of area institutes, area studies. So Russian studies, Middle East studies.
So the premise here is that the CIA is telling the Ford Foundation where to put their money. The reality is that the Ford Foundation is telling the CIA where to put its assets. Now they're working hand in hand, but it really is who's the parent, who's the child.
Yes, that's the most critical piece of this.
Studies, Latin American studies, African studies, East Asian studies. Now get this. It is impossible to design intelligent programs of economic assistance, political reorientation, or psychological warfare.
Now, the other thing that, set the groundwork here is these foundations, the money doesn't come out of thin air. The foundations, the tax-free foundations, were set up as a vehicle to basically hide generational wealth, from taxation, and they do it under the guise of charity. So most of the money they make, and they do make money inside there, that these trusts and foundations kick out, millions of dollars a year to the beneficiaries, the heirs and heiresses of these family fortunes, who continue their philanthropy. But because they do it under the guise of charity, Congress keeps earmarking tons of money to go into these causes. You see it with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Half the money they spend comes from the taxpayer. Same thing with the Ford Foundation, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. Carnegie Endowment for International War is a charity. Yet a lot of people are getting bloody rich from it. And they use that ridiculous amount of tax-free wealth to put their fingers on the scale of basically every country and economy in the world. And the CIA are their basically foot soldiers to make this happen.
So you have to go back to the premise of who the CIA works for.
Yeah.
Under the org chart, it looks like it works for the president. But we have proven unequivocally the CIA has never worked for the president, because most presidents are selected by the same body of people that then control the CIA. So he's got it backwards. The oligarchs, the International Syndicate, as I like to call them, of which is ran a lot by Skull and Bone members and others, those people are setting the agenda. For example, use Indonesia. They know, the CIA doesn't know, they know that Indonesia has the purest oil ever found and a mountain of gold. So if I want to go into Indonesia and I want the intelligence to justify me going into Indonesia, I set up an institute. That institute does studies that justify, oh my God, there's communism in Indonesia, where there is none. And they did have a small communist party that Sukarno was incorporating into his government, and he wanted to be neutral. Well, we already know you're not allowed to be neutral. And they attacked him on that premise using studies generated from these regional area experts, which, by the way, if you go back and look at their credentials, where did they go? They came from the same university system that we're talking about. So it's an all-out front under the guise of independent study, independent analyzed intelligence, when none of it is. It's entirely orchestrated. It didn't start in 1951.
Yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned the studies, is really important. Universities get a lot of their funding for all their studies from the government. And basically they apply for grants. And, well, you're not going to get a grant if you're trying to study or come to a conclusion that's different than what the establishment wants.
It will never get published.
Yeah, it'll never get published. And we talked about that last night, talking about Robert Maxwell. They controlled the entire peer-reviewed journal system. You and I talked about that last year. Well, let's say I disagree with the whole climate change theory. I'm not going to get funded. I'm not going to get published. And that's why they get to turn around and say, well, 97% of scientists agree with us. Well, yeah, that's because the ones who don't, you ignored. And the same thing happened with COVID. We see this throughout all these different topics. A lot of them have to do with social engineering. This whole woke stuff, this all came from, university studies. But who funded them? Who had these ideas ahead of time? And you can trace them all the way back. Once again, I say to the Fabians, but there's some philosophers like you just mentioned, Hegel, the king, that set the tone for the Fabian socialists.
Correct.
And the reason it's so offensive is because they do this under the guise of democracy, and they tell us that they're running, they're running the system, for our benefit. We're protecting democracy. We're protecting American interests. Well, which Americans' interests? Because I don't seem to think that I get a lot of benefit from Indonesia.
And the premise that even the government funds this. The government did not fund the majority of the university studies until the mid 1900s. Before that, it was the foundations directly. And we have tied the link between the Skull and Bones and all of these, the Carnegie, the Rockefeller. They funded those directly. As a matter of fact, Carnegie set up his own university to do it.
Vanderbilt University in Tennessee.
Correct. They set up their own universities, and this was well before 1951.
Yeah, and I mean, you got the Cabot family who basically financed Harvard.
Correct.
Now, how'd the Cabots make their money? Opium smuggling and the Atlantic slave trade. We're ruled by pirates and brigands. That's what the Rockefellers, how'd they make their money? Well, originally, John David Rockefeller's father was an opium peddler. It's over and over and over again how that, this deep, quote unquote, blue blood establishment that we have, our royalty of America, they didn't make.
Go ahead.
I said they didn't make their money just through being industrious and great businessmen. They cheated the system.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm done. Go ahead.
I wanted to make a comment that you said the Cabots, because I have a quote. A New England saying that the Lowells, which is another one of those families, only talk to the Cabots, and the Cabots only talk to God.
Yep, that's we'll do the full quote. We may have to do a episode on the Cabots as we go through these families. They're definitely on my list of ones to hit, and the full quotes even. Well, we'll save it for them. But yeah, it's true. And these are the ones we call the Boston Brahmins. I like to call them the Yankees. I like Brian McClanahan's term Yankees, and the Yankees not just a geographical reference. It's the people that decided that the government works for them. They're better than the rest of us. They created the American class system. They're the ones who forced us into the Civil War, air quotes, which is something we're going to really dive into in about 3 weeks. So I'll leave that one alone for now. But it's this attitude, and there's old money and then there's new money, and they definitely do have a class system here in America, and it ties into what we saw with the dollar princesses. Our robber barons married their daughters to British royalty who didn't have enough money to keep up their estates but had titles, and they start mixing socially. They're the ones who create these charities, and you have to be philanthropy is big business, and it's not just social positioning. Business gets done at these philanthropic things, and then they go to their politicians and they say, okay, we need this program, we need funding for this and funding for that. And what really ticks me off is none of this government spending is remotely constitutional.
Correct.
The federal government was not created to finance universities, foundations, regime change operations overseas. None of this. The federal government was supposed to handle defense, international affairs, and settling interstate disputes. Period. And these people basically grabbed the government, and from Wall Street and DC have run this entire country, and they lie to us about how this country is really run. They give us this image of representative government, and there's no such thing.
Correct.
And then they've created this Praetorian Guard, this DC bureaucracy. The real deep state is these people, that run the government, and their loyalty, they say they're patriotic, but they're loyal to the government and not to the Constitution and the people.
Correct. The state.
Exactly. So let's listen to Mike a little more.
The whole point of this is to get the CIA, the Director of Central Intelligence, to convince private foundations to give more money to big universities so that the CIA can use that information for, I'm sorry, can I zoom anymore? Psychological warfare. Okay. So we've been talking about Harvard, and we talked a lot about Columbia University, and I want to show you guys a couple things I found declassified. This is from 1951. It was declassified in 1999. It's called Foundation for Support for Research in the Fields of Behavioral Sciences, Communications, and Industrial Organization. It's an analyst memo at the Central Intelligence Agency about foundation support for...
All he's talking about is social engineering.
Correct.
But that's exactly what that is. How do you get herds of people to behave in a manner you want? How do you keep the peasants from rising up? How do you keep them divided? You have to put, what's one of the biggest tools they use is divide and conquer. They've been using this, for thousands of years, divide and conquer. Whether it's right, left, north, south, red, blue, white, black, they always try, Democrat, Republican. That's the Hegelian divide and conquer.
Correct. And that did not come about in 1951. The Tavistock behavioral research did not come about in 1951.
No, it was already in place.
Correct.
And what's
the
their
CIA
end goal?
is using it.
And their end goal, we really ought to talk about the end goal. The end goal is always been to create this one world government.
Correct.
And basically a return to feudalism, where they sit at the top and that there's only one underclass.
Correct.
Who are completely dependent on the state. And that's where you get the whole things like the depopulation, which is one of the most insidious ideas to ever come out of these places.
Yes.
because it means 90% of us are dead. And I don't really like to, I don't want to, not real crazy about that outcome.
Since we already know which class we're in, yeah, we're not all about that.
Continuing on for a bit.
Or research. We covered this at length in our CIA and the university streams. From the National Endowment for Democracy, that's the U.S. government, the Cold War's organization man, how Philip Mosley, the Columbia University godfather of the field of Soviet studies, Sovietology at the university level. And it starts, if you remember, by saying the young Central Intelligence Agency in 1946 only had 38 Soviet analysts, only 12 of whom spoke any Russian. How could American officials chart a foreign policy for the Cold War without knowing what the heck was going on? So the CIA...
And this is why it makes sense that the intelligence agencies work so closely with the universities. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Universities have exchange programs. They know their colleagues. They have back channels already built in place during peacetime, that it makes perfect sense that the two would go match up hand in hand.
Well, and again, putting the cart before the horse, those studies and those regional experts have been in the university system. I mean, if you go back when we were talking about the group that went over under the guise of the Red Cross, those experts have always been embedded in the university system. There's a reason why that all of the operations that precede the CIA, the taking over Hawaii, stealing of Panama, all of those things that we've went through, we were doing this all before the CIA. How did we do it? We did it the exact same way. They just had to pay for it. They had to pay for the intelligence. They had to pay for the private militaries that they deployed to instigate the regime changes. The only thing that changed in 1947 is they stood up the CIA and made us pay for it.
And I'd even say it started in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, 16th
absolutely.
Amendment, and 17th Amendment, because the 16th Amendment gives us the income tax so that your tax dollars and my tax dollars fund the government. The 17th Amendment gave the choice of senators, took it away from the states, and made it, basically a decision between one of two national political parties. And the Federal Reserve gave them unlimited counterfeiting ability. The Ponzi.
But that's just one of the steps. Obviously, I mean, the taking of Hawaii and the Spanish-American War, that all preceded that.
Yeah.
But they were paying for it. They were paying for the intel and sending geologists around the world on these expeditions to find where all the minerals, the targets, were going to be. All that, you're absolutely right. To me, that was the first step in transferring their expense account onto us.
Yeah, and that basically gave them unlimited funds. And as we'll get into here in a little while, I'll wait. We get into the Marshall Plan and how we continue to fund this stuff throughout the 1950s and 60s. And Benz gets into this here in a little bit. And he does a good job on it. And then we take a look back and say, okay, they started doing this stuff at least as far back as 1898, at least. And when she says they paid for it, the model was created by the British East India Company. You had to have your agents in the ports where you're going to trade. You had to know the pirates, the smugglers. That's how this is done, the slave traders. Well, that was done by, we started doing that, and our agents were law firms, most specifically Sullivan and Cromwell.
Yes.
Just coincidentally, Sullivan and Cromwell alumni ended up being, the Dulles brothers. So this is
State
where
Department, CIA, transfer it to them, and we're off to the races.
Exactly. And then they, instead of privatizing it, they basically they basically put all of their, and how's that worked out for the world? The 20th century is the bloodiest century in human history.
Yes.
We've had endless wars going nonstop ever since these events, since these people.
And it didn't start in 1951.
No, it goes back and that's really the point of the show. As Benz once again says, it's a CIA, it's a tail wagging the dog, is what that's the case he's making. All right. Took me that long to come up with that analogy.
Resolved that it would merge intelligence with big university to have area studies programs in areas of interest. So instead of having 38 Soviet analysts, you have 38,000, because every major university has a Soviet studies department. And those professors and institute directors and directors of centers will simply give their intelligence on what they're studying about Russia to the CIA. And this really hit the gas with Columbia University's Soviet Studies Department. Philip Mosley, folks are new here, I'll post the link. Thanks to the institutions, Soviet studies went from a scholarly backwater to intellectual juggernaut in a matter of years, sitting at the intersection of scholarship, intelligence, and philanthropy.
There's the philanthropy again.
Yeah.
Under the guise of charity.
Yeah. So, big university area studies programs, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the large foundations, which at the time were the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. Today that's going to include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation. But I bring this up because, again, the name of this CIA memo is Foundation Support for Research. And as we'll see, it is all about the CIA encouraging private foundations, the big private foundations, to give more money to universities.
And how do they encourage that, Colonel? Yeah, with government grants.
So, yeah, again, I have to push back on that. The foundations, to the extent that they were funding it, funded them. But with the creation of USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, which didn't happen in 1950. I mean, USAID was around as AID. But what, again, it's not aid, it's Agency for International Development. So they start funneling taxpayer money to these, but the pyramid is, the CIA is just at the bottom of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid is this international syndicate that is driving the agenda based on where they want to go and what resources they want to take. Tail wagging the dog is absolutely the best moniker for this entire thing. It's not driven from the bottom up. It's driven from the top down.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the whole origins of this whole intelligence apparatus, and you take it back to the British East India Company. Well, yeah, we have a whole intelligence network on whose behalf? The shareholders of the British East India Company, who wanted to exploit the labor and resources of every country they colonized.
Correct.
That sentence has never changed. It's true today.
Correct.
We don't call it colonization because that's expensive. So we just exploit them politically, economically, diplomatically,
and militarily.
Yeah, and quasi-military, because that's, the CIA doesn't. Boots on the ground is not very popular anymore. Well,
no. I'm not talking about boots on the ground. I'm talking about we create their military system and their national police system through what was the Office of Public Safety, and we colonize them from afar. They are, in fact, a colony, and they operate like a colony because they have no autonomy, because we own their politics, we own their economic system, and we own their military.
Yeah, and we train their military, and we train their intel agencies, and we see that all around the world.
Correct.
Places like Egypt, Pakistan, you see their military, they trained in America. And it's same pattern over.
We own them. They are a colony. It's just a modern version of it without us sitting in the country.
Yeah, and as soon as somebody rises up in any of these countries, whether they're a communist or not, if they're a populist, meaning they actually want to represent the people, and take back their own resources for themselves and get off the leash. Second that happens, then the regime change group comes in, the NGOs, once again, government funded. I mean, the whole apparatus.
The studies
they use to justify. So much of what the colleges do is just to give a justification so they can sell it to the public. Because if the public knew what they were doing in our name, there'd be pitchforks and torches out in the next day.
They have created these institutes on these college campuses and these programs to be the PR arm of the International Syndicate.
I'm going to try to skip ahead to it a little bit because there's another part coming up here that I think is really good. I think it'll be right around here.
There's Southern Asia, of course, Vietnam War, Slavic studies, Central and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. I love this one. The CIA wants musicology out of my nightmares in the 1950s, man. The CIA is trying to get financing to fund the musicology departments in universities.
That's actually pretty funny. I'm going to skip ahead a little more because there's a section I want to get to because it segues up for what you were talking about.
Well, let me just also mention, I didn't listen to the part about music, but if you understand the culture piece of this, they use things like rap and the alternative rock and those types of things in order to create these pockets of resistance that they can then expand upon and manipulate into being the boots on the ground. It is not coincidental that the CIA in some of their terror attacks concentrate on music venues, and usually music venues of people that don't toe the party line.
Yeah, and that's also some of that planned opposition, what have you. If you're going to embark on a strategy to socially engineer an entire population, you've got to manipulate the cultural influences. Music's a big part of that. Hollywood's a big part of that. We all know all about the Mockingbird media, and they hit it from every single angle.
Yes.
All right, let's go back to Mike for a bit.
This is funny. 1 second. Committee on Near Eastern Studies. The Near Eastern Studies translation.
This is what I want.
I bet you the whole fucking thing is government funded.
I'm going to get past the music.
Everything. Major sources of funding, but it might be a bunch of these like private foundations who all have businesses attached to them, like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Soros. But let's see, major sources of funding for ethnomusicology.
I want to get past the musicology.
Thanks.
There we go. This is the one we want.
The Ford Foundation, which at the time was the largest foundation in the country.
Would this be a good point to hammer home the point that the Ford Foundation was responsible for funding a ton of the Nazi war machine and the Soviets? They were giving engines, according to Anthony Sutton, who does great research, they were giving engines to the Soviets who were sending it to the North Vietnamese while people like my father were over there fighting, apparently to fight communism and support democracy. And this, that's the hypocrisy right there.
And we can point out that the Ford Foundation was the president of the Ford Foundation in 1966 was McGeorge Bundy. Yes. You also have several other people. And if you fast forward past the pre-World War II, you also find out that several of the Ford families were resigned from the Ford Foundation board because they were not on board with the use of the foundation to create this Hegelian funding both sides of these issues. And they walked away from their own foundation board in protest.
Yeah, I want to take you talk about Ford Foundations, take you back to one of our earliest shows on secret societies. We talked about foundations. There's a guy by the name of Horace Rowan Gaither, who's the administrator of the Ford Foundation. He was also in World War II the assistant director of the radiation laboratory at MIT. In 1948, he helps fund what would become the RAND Corporation. Who's the RAND Corporation?
CIA.
Military Industrial Complex think tank.
Yes, but it's basically a CIA front.
Sure. He becomes the same guy becomes the chairman of the MITRE Meter Corporation Board of Trustees. That's the nonprofit that manages federally funded research and development centers. That's an important sentence I just said. That's a big, big deal.
So, MITRE, it's MITRE.
Yeah, MITRE.
So, MITRE Corporation, MITRE entity was huge in the weapon system development. There were MITRE engineers all over Los Angeles Air Force Base. That was in the 80s. That's where I first even knew that was a thing. I'd never even heard of it before. They worked exclusively with the Space Systems Division space programs during Star Wars.
Okay, there's something called the Gaither Report, the same guy from 1957. He's interviewed by Norman Dodd. Norman Dodd is the brilliant, very ethical guy who ran the investigation on foundations 50 or 60 years ago. Gaither tells Dodd that he was part of the OSS and was getting White House directives to use Ford Foundation's grant-making power, this is an exact quote, to alter life in the United States so that it could be comfortably merged with that of the USSR.
There you go.
That's one world government right there.
Yes. Comfortably merged. For who? I don't think anybody in the Soviet Union was very comfortable other than the people at the top.
Yeah, and we've also, besides McGeorge Bundy, we had people involved in Ford, people like, John J. McCloy. I mean, it's all, the whole Ford Foundation, it's littered throughout the Skull and Bones legacy.
Correct.
Okay.
The Ford Foundation, I think, was only eclipsed in like the 1980s or 90s. Yeah. For many years, it was the largest private endowment in the world. It remains.
I almost feel bad that I just bought a new Ford yesterday.
Well, again, I don't think so. My premise that I developed probably a year and a half into this is there's almost this unwritten rule that if you are allowed, now keep in mind, as you accurately point out, you have the old money. If you're a new money guy, the Carnegie, the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Gates, Soros, Zuckerberg, you are required to create a foundation. So the foundation is never actually ran by the organization that is said to represent it. I've come to this because of the point you just made. They are littered with skull and bones who administer the foundations themselves or tangentially related people to skull and bones, because we already established the fact that you have the scrolling key, you have like these layers of these people's influence. So if you go and you dissect who runs these foundations, it's almost like there's a handshake at the beginning that says, like especially with the newer ones like Zuckerberg, we will, because we know that Facebook was handed to him as a DARPA project. We will let you be this person, but here's the handshake. You create a foundation. We're going to run your foundation, and it's going to fund what we want under the philanthropy. And you go back and you can, if you have that as your kind of thesis as to how these things operate, there's not an exception in the bunch, because they all consistently create this Hegelian dialect and feed into it.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. But before you jump into the topic that you brought on that Hegelian stuff, because I'm interested in it, just want to point out that what the Colonel just said is recently very well demonstrated. Zuckerberg is given Facebook, and just so happens he turns around and spends $400 million out of his foundation to steal the 2020 election.
Correct.
You know, he basically was doing it as he was told.
Correct.
That's why it's so interesting to see him and some of the other tech oligarchs right now trying to play nice with the Trump administration. We're not buying that.
I agree.
All right, talk to me about Hegel.
Okay. So I have to go back to three key players, all of which are Skull and Bones. So if you look at the premise that our education system was basically designed to keep us in the dark and to control us under a Hegelian type overarching strategy. Oftentimes we hear people accuse Rockefeller and Gates as being in control of that. However, it goes a lot farther back, as all of this stuff does. And remember that basically, and Anthony Sutton coined this phrase, you have a Hegelian right and a Hegelian left. So I've stayed away from the use of the term right and left only because it does not depict what's actually going on. But I just discovered this. I love his use of the Hegelian left and the Hegelian right because it frames it perfectly.
Yeah, guys, and let's real quick. For those who don't know, who was Hegel and why this matters. This is a German philosopher and really the father of a lot of these modern social theories. Karl Marx is downstream from him. You name it. We talk about left and right. The actual left and right, the way it's supposed to be, is the far left is 100% authoritarian government. The far right is zero government. That's anarchy. Neither one of them works. What the Constitution was set up on, we had the Articles of Confederation, which gave us just a little bit of government, but it wasn't enough. We couldn't maintain order. So we moved a little bit more to the left with the Constitution. Now, what's been happening ever since the Constitution is this pull far to the left. And, whether it be fascism, far left, 100% government, communism, 100% far left, theocracy, 100% far left, it's authoritarian government. And it's the opposite of individual liberty, which is what our country was founded on. That's our core. But these institutions have captured that government and dragged it because the bigger the government is, the more they can use the government to pay for their own commercial interests so they don't have to fund them themselves. And that is the big circle jerk. What Hegel does,
go ahead.
Real quick, what Hegel does is they create a false dichotomy. Correct. So that the system of tension between two opponents, they make it seem so. We're such a tribalistic we're tribalistic creatures, beings, humans, and they basically rely on those gut instincts, my tribe versus your tribe. And I do this to the university, why do you root for your hometown team? It's tribalism. It's in our nature, and they use that to keep us divided. They're worried about left and right, false dichotomy, so we never look up and see who's pulling the puppet strings. And that's Hegelian dialectic. They create basically a false sense of crisis so they can come in and provide the solution. And every single time, that's incrementally giving more and more power to the authorities.
And that's perfectly stated. And just to reiterate the control and how none of this stands up to a true look into it. let's take big agriculture. You have Monsanto Corporation, which we all know is behind the GMO engineering, the predator seed, and all of that, because they want world domination of agriculture, which you have to have if you're implementing a one world government. Well, George Bush, a bonesman, appoints Monsanto Vice President Dr. Virginia Weldon as the director of the FDA. So they immediately block labeling any GMO product as GMO. And so you see this play out in today's day and age. The whole thing of energy right now, you have the ability with fusion and all kinds of other energy sources, but they don't ever want you to look at that. So they keep your eye on the struggle of actual, like what they term fossil fuel, and create this solar and wind, because they want you looking at the nuts and bolts. They don't ever want you to look at the control mechanism. And it's hidden in every one of these things that basically go back to Hegel and his control mechanism. So
can I jump in real quick before we get too far past? Monsanto and the FDA. I'm so glad you brought that up. Who owns Monsanto today?
Tell everybody.
That would be the German drug maker Bayer.
Yes.
Who is Bayer's parent company? Who do they descend from? IG Farben, Hitler's biggest backer. Who financed that? The Bush cronies, that Skull and Bones, the Brown Brothers Harriman banks that financed the Nazis. Well, you mentioned the FDA. That stands for the Food and Drug Administration. So now you've got the big food manufacturer, Monsanto, owned by one of the biggest drug makers, Bayer, and regulated by the people that the Colonel just explained were put into place. So you create food that makes us sick. You create food that makes us sick. So we have to spend money on the drugs.
Correct.
And then you go back to who created the FDA. Well, that would have been the Rockefellers. And they were founding their foundation was funding all the universities, especially medical schools. Well, why'd they do that? Because their whole refinement of oil process, there's a whole bunch of different extracts, and a lot of them are used to make petroleum-based pharmaceuticals. So they created a system where we all get sick. They benefit from it. They keep us sick forever. They don't want us to die because we're a customer for life. And that's exactly what they did. It was all for part of the Rockefeller. And the Carnegies are involved in that one too, but the Rockefellers are the big ones. And boom, now you know who actually created the universities for that purpose.
Exactly. So if you go back to what we studied in the first lessons that you gave us on Skull and Bones, it says it was incorporated, not the original entity, but it was incorporated, as you pointed out several weeks ago, by the Russell Trust in 1856. Did you know that originally, and I don't remember if we covered this or not, but it was referred to by other people, not Bonesman, of course, as the Brotherhood of Death?
Indeed.
So you just described the death machine. Produce the food that makes us sick and control the medicine that we never can get well on. So again, it just goes hand in hand with all of this other stuff. And there's also a connection of the Skull and Bones that was created in 1833 at Yale. Was also, there was another corollary, because we always talk about England, but there was another corollary to that secret society in Germany as well. And there's a lot of the people whose philosophy, Hegel being one of them, that adopted that in Germany as well. So go ahead.
No, continue. That's a really important point.
So we know, as you told us, William Russell and Alphonso Taft, who Taft becomes the Secretary of War in the Grant administration, and William Howard Taft, another relative. So you have this entire and I don't think we've yet said that over the history of, and maybe you did at the very beginning, over the history of Yale, you have about 2,500 people that have kind of scattered out, and for a very long time, until we finally got a list of those people secretively. We didn't even know who was in this population. And as you've led us through all of these months of discovery, you find out that they didn't just happenstancely get into all of these positions. There were a lot of behind the scenes, and it was an invisible hand guiding us that basically no one even knew existed until that initial list of the different people in the classes was exposed.
Yeah, I think people did know that there was an invisible hand. They couldn't put a name on it.
Correct. That's a better way of saying it.
Woodrow Wilson, one of his last things he did in office, we talked about, there's this insidious force so powerful that none dares speak its name. That was always there. I think it's been there in America since at least 1860. We're going to talk about that in 3 weeks a lot more deeply. So I don't want to dive into, I don't want to jump in front of that, but continue on your Hegel path, because we just did Monsanto and I interrupted you.
Yeah. And so that kind of sets the stage for it. So also, one of the aspects that we've not covered yet is there was actually on the campus of Yale some pushback, even when it was initially in its more formative stages. There was a publication, because you couldn't publish anything on Yale that said anything bad about the Skull and Bones, that was called Iconoclast. And it was written as basically a scathing review that this is actually a quote: "The order is a deadly evil." There was also a rare article about Skull and Bones published in Esquire in 1977 by Ron Rosenbaum, who, this is a quote: "Tonight he will die to the," because they're describing the order. "Tonight he will die to the world and be born again in the order, as he will henceforth refer to it. The order is a world unto itself, in which he will have a new name and 14 new blood brothers, also with new names." And basically goes on to describe it as a worldwide mafia. So I wanted to throw that in too.
It's funny about the new names. My favorite of the new names, George H.W. Bush was known as Gog, and George Bush was known as Magog. Gog and Magog. That's pretty, satanic.
Yes. But very satanic. Okay. So also, let me get to the part. I had done a whole bunch. So just to show the connection, the counterpart to the order in England was known as the group. So there's a direct connection, and it says that the order controls substantial wealth of Andrew Carnegie, and this is from Anthony Sutton. But no Carnegie has ever been a member of the order. The order used the Ford wealth so flagrantly, as I mentioned earlier, that 2 Ford members of the Ford Foundation board left as a result of that. It also says the name Morgan has never appeared on any membership list, although Morgan partners are with the inner core, like Davidson and Perkinson. And Astor, the family, is identified in the UK as part of the group, but the US branch of it was never associated with Skull and Bones. So there's this direct correlation. So we've got the Hegel group in Germany, you have the British, the group, and you have at Yale, the Skull and Bones. And that kind of created like a trifecta of control. So a lot of things about how the correlation of the Carnegie Institute was the first president was Daniel Coit Gilman, and other members of the order have been on the Carnegie boards. So you just see this complete infiltration of the apparatus. One of the things I didn't know, and I just posted it yesterday, was, and it seems like, again, I've got so much crap in my head now, that there was a direct correlation to Archibald MacLeish, who was a bonesman, was basically wrote the Constitution for UNESCO. And again, right? UNESCO, as we all know, had within it an educational element as well that has basically tried to globally co-opt the education process. And again, you find at the heart of it, at the very beginning, a bonesman. So let me get down to and it also says, Anthony Sutton said that they controlled the education, which would determine how the population of the future will behave. They controlled the money, the means of holding wealth and exchanging goods. They controlled the law between these organizations, the authority to enforce the will of the state, a world law, and a world court in order to do the same for the globe. They controlled the politics via like state departments, and they used psychology as the means of controlling how people think. They use philanthropy so that people think well of the controllers. They use medicine so that they had power over health, life, and death. They controlled religions so that you could co-opt the belief system. They controlled the media, which gatekeeps what you know today. And all of that was initially done by kind of a trifecta. And I want to talk about one guy, Daniel Coit Gilman, president of Johns Hopkins University. He went over and studied psychology in Germany, specifically a guy by the name of WUNDT. I don't know how you pronounce that. Won't? Won't.
Sounds German.
Okay, so that melded education with psychology in the US. They established laboratories. They brought these educational laboratories into major universities and generated hundreds of PhDs to teach the new educational conditioning system via psychology. And one of the first of these, Johns Hopkins doctorates that was awarded a PhD using this Hegelian German psychology, was John Dewey. The educational system that we are now basically trying to get our arms around was used to change the way people spell, read, and write for mass behavioral programming. Andrew Carnegie profited from war through his steel holdings, but under the guidance of members like Daniel Coit Gilman, Carnegie was also enthusiastic president and financial backer of American Peace Society. just like the Carnegie Endowment for Peace/War. It seems like, go ahead.
So you mentioned the Prussian education system, and Kurt Gilman, who we've talked about, the Gilmans, funded the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale that we talked about.
I got that. Yes.
He's also the second president of the UC Berkeley, the first president of Johns Hopkins, founding president of Carnegie Institution, descendant of an Edward Gilman who actually was one of the first settlers of Exeter, New Hampshire, which is about 10 minutes that way from me. He's a descendant of Thomas Dudley, who was one of the founders of Harvard College. And this whole German-Prussian tradition, this is brought over to America in the 1850s by Horace Mann. And we've already talked about the Horace Mann School, which is one of those private grooming schools that we send people to the Ivy Leagues and then into these secret societies. This is all attached. And then Gilman ends up on a John D. Rockefeller General Education Board.
Correct. So you skipped ahead a little bit, but that is, no, that's perfect. That is the entire thing. And this was all done well before 1951. And
the Prussian education system was so attractive to these people. Remember, it was brought over by people who founded Harvard University.
Exactly.
And sat on these boards. The Prussian education system was so attractive to them because they taught discipline and not to question the authorities.
Correct.
They're going to groom an entire generation of technocrats to support the entire structure above them. That's Washington, D.C. That is who runs these think tanks, the government, these our sacred institutions, the universities. It's all stems right from what the Colonel's talking about.
So in the 20s, W. Averill Harriman, who we were just talking about recently, prime supporter of the Soviets, both financially and diplomatically, because we talked about the Red Cross trip over there. Harriman was instrumental and participated in the Bolshevik Roscom-Bank, the first Soviet commercial bank. And I mistakenly said during that one show, and I want to correct that it was Warburg. It was actually Max May is the guy that I was thinking about. Max May is the one that did the foreign investments from the Roscom Bank. So basically, you have this entire network operating inside of what we were, conditioned to hate, the Bolshevik communist Russia, but the infrastructure inside of that was dominated by these very same people. So that's important. So now our textbooks tells us that the Nazis and Soviets were bitter enemies and that they were the Hegelian opposites of each other, but funded by the exact same people. So also was pointed out that the Bundy family, as you've taught us so well, also is kind of one of those Hegelian dialects right in front of our face. William Bundy was in the CIA for at least a decade, and I argue much longer than that because they never leave. McGeorge Bundy was the national security assistant to Kennedy and Johnson. So the Bundys supported the U.S. European policy, basically, which gave us NATO. Yet the Bundys have been linked to activities that would, on its face, seem very anti-NATO. Like, for example, they both funded the Institute for Policy Studies, which was labeled inside the United States a Marxist supporting organization. So again, if you don't have both sides of this, you don't have a Hegelian dialect and you can't divide the people. So, and at the heart of all of that, you find the order. You find Skull and Bones. So, moving on. In the Hegelian system, conflict is essential. So you have also one of the things that most people never talk about when they talk about Hegel is he believed that the state is the absolute. The state is basically God in his, and he also was very supportive of the New World Order kind of conflict or kind of concept. So the, one of the people that was intimately involved in this was a guy by the name of William Russell. He was in Germany in 1931 and 32. He studied Hegelian theory while he was there. So again, he comes back to the United States and is an instrumental piece of this apparatus that gets set up in the United States. So it says members of the order are to be found in every segment: education, foundations, politics, government, industry, law, and finance. And as you pointed out, if you look at just those categories, they're, as the point you've made perfectly, is they're way overrepresented in the central controlling aspects of that. But I had one area, let me get down to it. You also have Stimson came up because Stimson,
Bonesman.
Yes. He had a special assistant, Harvey Hollister Bundy, another bonesman. And they were basically, as you pointed out earlier, part of the Manhattan Project. Again, you have to have that fear. So what did the Manhattan Project give us? Well, there's a big argument of whether we needed to drop those bombs in Japan, and we were sold by the media that it saved so many American lives because we took out that whole thing. But there's an argument to be made that Japan had already lost the war at that point. But the dropping of those bombs and the use of nuclear weapons basically furthered these people's Hegelian dialect by terror. So the fear that was generated for the next 50 years, psychologically controlling an entire world based on the use of nuclear weapons. So you do anything possible to avoid that use, which basically was crafted in order for us to give up our freedoms under the fear of a nuclear response. And then you have a lot of evidence that says that there were many of these nefarious people that basically transferred that nuclear technology over to the Soviet Union, which of course is controlled in large connection. We've already made the connections. So you can't have the Hegelian dialect without an alter ego. So now the Soviet Union has nuclear weapons. We have nuclear weapons, and they use them and the perpetuation of them, because of course there's a lot of evidence that we provided Pakistan, to include the little trigger switches with their nuclear weapons. And we all know about Israel and their nuclear program. So the proliferation under the guise of non-proliferation went on, and it just perpetuates this Hegelian dialect. And you find at the heart of all of this, these same people.
And what you're really describing is the manufactured crisis designed to keep the population living in fear, so that those authoritarians can incrementally encroach on all of your individual liberties. And I take you back to Benjamin Franklin, I think it was, who said, "He who would sacrifice liberty for safety deserves neither liberty nor safety." And that's what they do. They keep us scared. If it wasn't the Cold War, the threat of nuclear, it became Islamic terror, and that was manufactured as well. If it's not climate change, it's this deadly virus called COVID. The result of every single one of these manufactured crises, and even some of it's real, it actually exists, but they just make it worse. They magnify the threat. And the result, or their solution every single time, is more government, more globalist government, less freedom. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Correct. 3 people. Daniel Coit Gilman, first president of the University of California, first president of Johns Hopkins. Timothy Dwight, the 12th president of Yale University, and Andrew Dixon White, the first president of Cornell University. Gilman imported the experimental psychology of Hegelian physiologist Wilhelm Wundt from Germany. This psychology was grafted onto the American education system through laboratories at Columbia and Chicago University via John Dewey, who was steep in Hegelian philosophy.
And studied for 5 years in the Soviet Union. Dewey did.
Okay, so they use the money of the foundations in order to, they basically was kind of the Praetorian Guard of infiltrating this education system based on the Hegelian dialect and the creation of an allegiance to the state as opposed to individualism. You also have John D. Rockefeller and Mrs. Russell Sage and the Ford Foundation that was instrumental in this effort. And it says in the 1950s, 3 members of the order left Yale and working together, those 3 I just mentioned, basically revolutionized the American education system. Timothy Dwight, which was class of, 1949, professor of Yale Divinity School, and then 12th president of Yale University, Daniel Gilman. Maybe these are in the 18s. He was 1852. First president of the university we just talked about. He also was the first president of the Carnegie Institution. Andrew Dixon White, first president of Cornell. He also, more importantly, was the first president of the American Historical Association. So let's control history. Within a few years, go ahead.
He who controls the past controls. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Meaning, if you can rewrite your history, you can shape what happens next, and that's correct. What they do.
So they all graduated in 1849, 1852, and 1853. All went to the University of Berlin, all steeped in Hegelian philosophy. And so Dwight was there from 1856 to 58. Gilman was there at the University of Berlin from 1854 to 55. And all of that was dominated by Hegel philosophy at the time. And it says the University of Berlin in 1856 at the Institute of Physiology was none other than William Wundt. How'd you say it? Wundt?
I was going to try to say Wundt, but I don't quote him.
The founder of experimental psychology in Germany and a later source of American PhDs who would come back to America and have vital roles in the American education system. And it said, this is Anthony Sutton. The right Hegelians were the root of Prussian militarism and the spring for the unification of Germany and the rise of Hitler. Key names among those that were labeled as right Hegelians were Karl Ritter at the University of Berlin, Baron von Bismarck, and Baron von Stockmar, confidential advisor to Queen Victoria in England. You also have Karl Theodor Dolberg, who was chancellor in the German Reich. And you have Lord Acton in England. So again, you have, now we've created the Hegelian right. You have the Hegelian left, which obviously is Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Max Steiner, and Moses Hess. So they are literally creating in Germany and infiltrating the rest of the world with predetermined right and left, all educated out of the same system.
Pull up my screen real quick. Because as you're talking about the Hegelian right, I went straight to the Hegelian left, Karl Marx, who of course was studying in Germany the exact same time period, writes the Communist Manifesto, along with Frederick Engels. But second paragraph.
Yes.
A young Hegelian, he is influenced by the philosophy of George William Frederick Hegel, and both critiqued and developed Hegel's ideas, such as the German ideology, 1846, the Grundrisse, 1857. While in Paris, he wrote his economic blah, blah, blah. After moving to Brussels in 1845, they were active in the Communist League, in which they wrote the Communist Manifesto. This is exactly what the Colonel just described. That's Karl Marx. And these Hegelian right, this Hegelian left, false opposition, moving towards a one-world government, set us on the path of a century of world war and never-ending conflict. And the only people who benefited from that are our robber baron masters.
So Henry Coit Kingsley, which was a bonesman from the class of 34, was treasurer of Yale from 1862 to 1886. James Kingsley was Gilman's uncle and a professor at Yale. William Kingsley, a cousin, was editor of the journal New Englander. The Coit side of the family, Joshua Coit, was a member of the order in 1853, as well as William Coit in 1887. Gilman's brother-in-law, the Reverend Joseph Parrish Thompson, another bonesman. Gilman returned from Europe in late 1855 and spent the next 14 years in Connecticut, New Haven, all around Yale, basically consolidating their plan to basically overthrow the U.S. education system. It says that's when he helped set up the Russell Trust, and Gilman became treasurer, and William Russell, the co-founder, was the president of it. It's also, it says, notable that there is no mention of the order Skull and Bones anywhere in the Russell Trust or about its secret society activity. So if you were going back and looking, you wouldn't necessarily associate it with it. But all of these people coalesced at that time to set up the Russell Trust. And then you fast forward and you have Gilman becomes the assistant librarian at Yale in the fall of 18. So he's going to control all of the material that's available at Yale. He also, at that time, filled a vacancy on the New Haven Board of Education. They were going to use that as kind of the incubator, if you will. You mentioned the Sheffield Scientific School, which we mentioned on our Bonesman series. It says the science department, basically the Sheffield Scientific School became the science department of Yale in kind of a generic looking at it. And science is where they're going to house the incubator for all of this philosophical, experimental psychology apparatus. It says there were, at the time in the 1850s, there were very little science going on at Yale. So in 1861, it all got concentrated into the Sheffield Scientific School with private funds from Joseph Sheffield. And Gilman was kind of the fundraiser to behind the scenes to make that bigger. Gilman's brother had married the daughter of chemistry professor Benjamin Silliman, who is another Skull and Bones from 1837. This brought Gilman into contact with Professor Dana, also a member of the Silliman family. And this group decided that Gilman should write a report to reorganize Sheffield. This was done, and it was entitled The Proposed Plan for the Complete Reorganization of the School of Science Connected with Yale College. So basically,
Was that the Professor Edward Salisbury, Dana, who we talked about last week on the scroll and key?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you see the whole connection. They go to the Connecticut state legislature and they get funding. So there was a bill passed called the Morrill Land Bill, introduced into Congress in 1857. It was passed in 1859, but it was vetoed by President Buchanan. It was later signed by none other than President Lincoln. This bill is now called the Land Grant College Act. It donated public lands for state universities under science and agriculture. And we just talked about science and we talked about agriculture. So basically, Gilman got every penny allocated for Connecticut for one school, the Sheffield School. So again, us funding our own demise.
Very much so. And here's where it gets interesting. Look at some of the things that are being unwound as we speak. The Department of Education is about to be gone. This is a move back towards federalism. That is a huge strike against this. The FDA is now under the controls of the great Bobby Kennedy. We're seeing all kinds of chemicals taken out of our food. We're seeing drugs pulled off. We're seeing drug prices reduced. We're seeing certain vaccines pulled. All this stuff is being reversed as we sit here today. And I'll go back to one of my favorite talking points. This would not be possible if we weren't living through Gutenberg 2.0. The internet, which was supposed to be their ultimate tool of control, has been flipped on them because people like us are out there in our audience and we're educating ourselves in real time. And we're saying, wait a minute, no more. And it is, the truth shall set us free. This is an information war. It is a culture war, but it wouldn't happen had we not taken control of the internet. And that's what set off Brexit. It's what set off Trump in 2016. It all started because they lost control.
So on the original board of this Sheffield school, you have Professor Brush, who was Gilman's close friend. You have Daniel Gilman, who is a Hegelian guy, Skull and Bones. You have W.T. Trowbridge, John Beach, Skull and Bones, William Phelps, Skull and Bones. You also have George St. John Sheffield, the son of the guy that's the name of it. He was initiated in 1863, and the first dean of Sheffield was J.A. Porter, who also is a member of Skull and Key. The order's control over all of Yale was evident by 1870s, even under the administration of Noah Porter, who wasn't a member. And it says during that time, the opposition at Yale through that iconoclast, which was an anonymous, they were exposing all of this and no one paid attention to them because they got no traction. Obviously the Yale's presidency over this time is also very important because you had either direct bonesmen or people that was, so I want to close with this because this is really important. From 1886 to 1899, Timothy Dwight, who's a bonesman, was president, followed by another Arthur Twining Hadley, bonesman, then James Angle, who was not a bonesman, but came to Yale from the University of Chicago, where he had worked with Dewey, and built a school of education and was the past president of the American Psychological Association. which then brings Hegel back into the picture. From 1937 to 1950, Charles Seymour, a member of the Skull and Bones, was president, followed by Alfred Whitney Griswold from 1950 to 63. Griswold was not a member, but both Griswold and the Whitney families, who you've talked about a lot, had members, family members that were in the order. Dwight Torrey Griswold, Bonesman, and William Edward Schrank Griswold, order. 1963, Keenman Brewster took over as president. The Brewster family has had several members in the order, and also in law, the religious ministry, as opposed to education. So I just painted for you kind of like an all-out umbrella of pushing this agenda, which has its roots in the Hegelian dialect. One last point, because I found this fascinating. Part of the agenda was the adoption, like totally changing the way we learn to read. And I didn't know this, but Anthony Sutton points this out, that they basically adopted, they being this school of education, John Hopkins, and all of these, they all set up departments of education and basically took over the college level education process. There was a method of reading set up in 1810 for deaf mutes by Thomas Hopkins Gaulier. He was the eldest son of a French Huguenot family, and he did it in conjunction with Jane Hopkins. She traces her roots back to a Hartford, Connecticut as well. So they basically set up this system to teach people, you know how we kind of went from phonetical reading. They gave birth to this sight reading, which was very prominent in the deaf mute community. Well, why would you do that? Why would you teach people, and it basically philosophically, psychologically, they felt that by doing that, they weren't teaching people educational skills. They were basically pre-programming them psychologically to take things, what they see, and I'm not going to explain this well, but there was a psychological operation going on to program children to recognize things you see in its entirety, as opposed to teaching them the critical skills of each fundamental individual thing having something and then putting them together for use. And this stemmed back to the kind of German psychological operation of being able to program kids to take your word for something, as opposed to being able to dissect it and then use your brain as a muscle to put things together for yourself. And it really fundamentally changed our educational system forever.
Yeah, and I think the person who wrote about that the earliest and the best was, once again, we go back to Charlotte Isabite, and The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America is the name of her great book. There's videos out there. We should spend some more time on Charlotte. Coincidentally, she is the source of the list of Skull and Bones members that she got from her father when he passed away, and she gave it to Anthony Sutton. And that's how we know a lot of this stuff. But to summarize what Colonel and I have just been talking about, the name of the video of Mike Benz that we're critiquing is How the CIA Created the Modern Universities. We just demonstrated how the modern universities created the CIA. It is a wag the tail, or a wag the dog type of situation. Benz doesn't go deep enough, and that's the critique of him. CIA's 1947, the colonel just talked about setting the whole precedent, the whole foundation for this 100 years prior.
Correct.
These people were already in place, already up to their shenanigans, long before the CIA was ever even an idea.
And all of these colleges were set up either directly by Bonesmen, ran by Bonesmen, funded by Bonesmen, and crafted, and they produced the Allen Dulleses. They produced the John Foster Dulleses, who then move into government because it's a statist organization. They infiltrate the U.S. government, completely change it in 1913, and then morphed into producing these people who are now the statists in our government, who make up the CIA. So the thought that the CIA created the modern university is kind of just laughable on its face.
Well, that's a pretty good way to end this. I think we've proven our point pretty good. And the genesis of this show was, I was just watching a Mike Benz video a week or so ago. He made it like 2-3 weeks ago. And I go, wait a minute. So I text the colonel, and she just looked at the title and she goes, oh yeah, we're doing a show. And and again, I'm certainly not going to say that my research can compare to some of the stuff Mike Benz has done. He's done a great job of exposing a lot of things. But to get something that fundamentally wrong, it's interesting. I mean, it's just the title itself, and it's demonstrable, as we've just done, that is not the case. So,
well, and again, I like the Wag the Dog, because if you're going to make an assertion like that, you really have to do the research into what created the modern day university if you're going to make that. And that's the kind of the problem that I have overall. And of course, the reason why I got blocked is because I kept calling out this nebulous blob, because it's not nebulous. Inside of that is the answer to everything. And by to me, I'd be so bold as to say that's part of a psychological operation. So if I can capture all of that thing without naming it and set it off to the side, then I can give you all of these well-researched, as you point out, details, but it means nothing if you never open up the blob and look who's doing it.
Yeah, it's like he's missing the forest for the trees.
Correct.
Yeah.
He's very good at identifying the kinds of trees.
Yes. Oh, very good. I mean, the guy's brilliant. Don't take anything away from him. I really enjoy watching him work through some of the USAID stuff. It's, I've learned from the guy. But I think we've made our point. Yeah, I am going to, when I upload this to my channel, War Hamster at Rumble, I am going to title this video "Wag the Dog." Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks for hosting. This was a great conversation. I hope the audience got a little bit of a, sort of a little different show than we normally do, but I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And
but it really isn't, because this is kind of the practical use of all of the education that we have provided over the last several months. It's actually applying what we have learned. And I don't think we could have done the show if we hadn't already set the historical aspects of how Skull and Bones still today touches literally everything that we do.
100% agreed.
Yeah, I love being able to apply the knowledge that we have gained by doing this research into being able to either support or refute things that, and we do that all the time. All of that's the whole thing where you and Ghost and I get on these live organizations, and we all come at everything from a completely different perspective, but we can analyze today's going on. And you just made the point of watching Trump unpeel this onion, and that's literally what's happening. But if you don't go back and you do the research, you would think what he's doing is random, and it's not random at all, as you pointed out earlier.
Yeah, going after the other thing, it's going after the Harvard Foundation. For the love of God, that's striking at the heart of the beast. This is happening right in front of us. And
Yes.
it's not an accident. And I'm not saying trust the plan, but
No.
Trump and the people around him recognize these systems have to be broken apart piece by piece. And I'll just close with this. None of this is possible if Lincoln hadn't nationalized and centralized the government for his New England blue blood Yankee benefactors, who then turned this entire country into a cash machine for themselves. So
I thought you'd find it interesting that he signed that land grant bill that basically created the foundation for the Sheffield School. That was new to me. Thank you, Anthony Sutton.
yeah, and that'll tie into the Roosevelts, who we're doing in 2 weeks. So Anthony Sutton, great work. Colonel,
Yes.
have a great Tuesday.
Thank you. You too. See you guys
Cheers,
later.
Evan. Cheers.